This is Paul Sanneman with Business Success Tips, where I'm talking to Mr. Bouda. I'm going to call him Ryan Bouda, but I love the last name. It sounds so informative, right? And he's with Lead Training and Coaching. And so I guess the first question all listeners have is, why should I listen to you? Right?
Always the best first question to talk with someone about. So one thing that I think makes this so unique when it comes to sales, and then you add in contractors, is I actually have a background in construction management. That's where I came from. I've worked for different real estate as well as residential construction companies. So I actually have a fun background in some different things. And so I think I bring a lot of value to be able to connect to the things that I know that you experience. And then more importantly, the background in conversational intelligence, which is a methodology and model around how to have conversations that engage people, that help navigate challenges that arise, like an objection, things like that. And how do we handle those? And so how to really open great space, how to communicate, how to get people's buy-in and engagement.
So I'm going to start with the first question here.
Yeah.
How do you have, Ryan, how do you have an intelligent conversation with somebody who's not intelligent?
Oh, well, everyone is intelligent is what we say.
I see. Okay.
We talk about that conversational intelligence is our ability to start to learn and recognize how we call them interaction dynamics, how there's so much more to a conversation than just words, like we're doing now. There's so much more to it. Whether people actually see us, physically or on the phone, on the voice, our tone of voice, how everything happens is what being an intelligent communicator becomes. And your salespeople, yourself or your team, their ability to navigate that and understand the importance of body language and tone of voice and how they come across and ask questions and listen is going to be tremendous in this process here today.
Okay. So most of the people listening to this podcast are pretty small contractors, and they're the ones that ends up, there's two sales. One, they have to sell the employee on working for them. And second, they have to sell the client on buying their stuff, whatever their stuff happens to be, right? So I'm getting a typical scenario. Here we have a person, he wants to sell a $500,000 remodel to a client, okay? He shows up at their house, or she shows up at the house. There's the husband and the wife, and so he knocks on the door, they open the door and say, come on in. Where do you go from there?
I'm going to break this down. I'll pause each step. We'll see what you have, follow-up questions, things, and we'll break this down. There's about 3 or 4 we're going to talk about. The first thing is there's a moment of contact that happens in all of us. The moment of contact is our brain decides, are we going to trust this person or are we not going to trust this person? And I'm going to say that if you want to sell a $500,000 remodel, we've got to be in trust, right? And so it's actually just hardwired. So I'm not going to go into that, but your ancestral hardwiring is don't trust people. And so we need to actually take that moment of contact and make it something positive, make it so that people are open and engaged. And so I always tell people the first thing we want to do is get into a question discovery mindset that says, I'm interested in you. I'm not here to sell you on 500,000. I'm here to hear about you and what you're interested in, what you want to learn.
Ryan, let's about that. So what about, do I wear a collared shirt? Do I wear a suit? I mean, because when they look at me, they're going to make a decision in about 2 nanoseconds, whether I'm a good guy or not, just by looking at me, right? Am I black? Am I white? Am I blue? Am I male? Am I female? So how do you impress? I mean, is it like mirroring? How do you make sure when they look at you, they don't go, oh my God, he's a contractor. I mean, he's in Levi's, has dirty boots, has a teared up shirt. I'm not going to trust this guy. If he's in a suit, he's going to screw me because he's smarter than I am. So the very first moment when you knock on the door and he's standing there, what do you need to look like?
I think that's a great question because that is all true. And it's just for fun, 7 nanoseconds. 0.07 seconds, how quick they make that decision. I always tell people to really think about their industry and their client, but he is correct. Paul is correct. You cannot be in dirty clothes and just pulled off shirt, especially depending on your line of business, what you're selling, and to be really mindful of showing up in the correct attire. Paul's probably right. Probably not a suit. Right? That's probably not the industry, but to show up looking professional, have something with maybe a logo on it, be prepared. I always tell people preparation is important. So coming in and having a little knowledge, a little understanding about the people, but I will tell you that your personal appearance, your smile, and how you approach those first 3 seconds will be really important into building the trust right away.
So I love what about, you hear things about the handshake, looking in the eye. And I'm going to go as far as what car if you drive up in a Ferrari or you drive up in an old beat up truck, they look in the driveway, they're going to make a decision right there, right?
Absolutely. You know, our brain's so wired that it adds those stories, and sometimes they're not our stories. It's, oh my gosh, you won't believe the guy showed up in this and then they ripped us off, or, oh, they did this and they had a beat up car and they didn't do a good job. I always tell people logo branding is so important. So have that somewhere on yourself and on your vehicle, even if it's just a magnet you stick on the side of your car. You can make it simple. You don't have to wrap your car, but having that there, having your car, I always tell people to park in the street, right? Park right next to the house in the street, facing it so they can see your car, and really set yourself up for a professional starting part of the conversation, which I think is hard sometimes. I would say,
I had one guy that used to drive he used to build literally, $20 million houses, but he had his entire team drive Priuses because they wanted to be socially correct. Right. So, yeah. It was funny because for him it worked, because when they looked at the Prius, they go, here's a person concerned about the environment. And they're also, at that point, it was many years ago, the Prius had a certain kind of connotation to it. Right.
Yep.
And so maybe it's, I'm thinking for me, it would have to be a truck is good if it's a clean truck and it's pretty new, not a brand new 4-wheel drive truck that's raised 3 feet. That's not going to work. Right.
Yep.
So something that you would trust the person that drives this vehicle, right?
I think that is the best way to look at that, is what is our brand and methodology we're trying to display as an organization. And then I would think about your buyer's context. What are they looking for? And then align those things with that. So if your buyer is looking for a suit, maybe that's the correct way to go, right? But if your buyer is looking for a professional who shows up, look at your buyer and look at their context and speak to them, right? This isn't about me. This is about the buyer. And that's a huge change in thought.
So I talked to an IBM salesman. He says, when people look at you, you don't want them to see your clothes. I mean, they need to be, in a sense, invisible, because if they see your clothes, they're not looking at you. So to me, the thought is, if they look at your truck, go, my God, that's an expensive truck, I can't afford this guy. Or that's a piece of garbage truck, he probably does a crappy job. It needs to be, they look at the truck, it meets their expectations. They look at your uniform, it meets their expectations. And, you're clean shaven, or maybe not if you have a beard, but it's at least a well-trimmed beard, right? So that, I think that first impression, you're right, has to be good, because you can't fix it. That's the problem, right?
The way those initial moments of contact works is pretty quickly someone's brain is going to decide, do they trust you or not? And if they go to the no, then getting past that bridge is going to be very difficult without a ton of skill.
I always say resurrection is harder than birth, right? I mean, it's hard.
Yes. Yes.
So, okay. So when you come in, they've got to look at you. When you look in the eyes, you shake their hand. I mean, what if they're wearing a mask? Do you wear a mask? That was COVID time. Maybe it's not still happening anymore. I mean, do you put little booties on your feet? You don't put booties on your feet. What do you think?
I think that there's a few ways to approach that depending on how you best see your client. If it's something like the mask, ask them if they're comfortable. You'd be happy to put one on. And even if you don't agree, doesn't matter, right? It's about the buyer. What does the buyer need and what do they see? If it comes to the booties, I think it depends. What do you wear? So if you're a person who goes around and you have dress shoes, you're probably okay, right? But if you have work boots and you got the mud, I would just ask them, would it be okay if I take these off outside? I don't want to get any mud in your house. Or, I'm going to, maybe you change shoes, by the way, before you walk in.
Actually, I saw one guy that said, they put on booties just to show they care about your house. And the person says, no, you don't have to put on booties. Say, no, I really need to do this, man. We normally do this. So it's establishing like, oh, they're going beyond what's expected. I had a client once, and he said, good. Which was good. He said he came in, he has a $250 million residential plumbing company in Phoenix. And he said, if somebody calls you up and you want to fix their water heater, and you go out and fix their water heater and you leave, and that's all you do, you're screwed. Because there's no relationship, there's no anything, because you just fix their water heater and they expected that. So I think you're talking about other stuff, that building relationship. Okay, now you've worn the light clothes, you're walking in the door. Now you look them in the eye, you shake the hand, you don't shake the hand. What do you do next?
Typically for me, I would recommend the shaking the hand and
firm handshake, wussy handshake. I mean,
I always tell people there's just the right amount, right? There's no too firm, probably not good, too weak, not good, but there's just an amount. And there's actually a chemical reaction that happens when we do make that handshake. And so you do want to make the eye contact, make the handshake just at the right pressure to just say, I'm engaged.
And do an elbow bump if they don't want to shake hands, right?
And if they don't want to shake hands, do the elbow bump, do a fist pump, move forward.
Right, okay. If you're paranoid of germs, that happens these days sometimes. Okay, so keep going. So he's in the yard. What do we do next? And what's the next step?
I always tell people the first thing you can do is start to build rapport by asking a couple questions, whether you know some things, maybe a discovery call, something like that, or you can just go right into it. It might be when it comes to houses, and maybe, when did they move in here? What drew them to the house initially? You're trying to, or then how's the house treated them over the years? How have they enjoyed it? How have they grown into it? The questions that you do initially are going to help them realize that you're building some repertoire about what they really enjoy about it. Because when you get someone to be like, yeah, we moved in and we really love this about it. We love the neighborhood. We love the location. We did this. You're starting to build, here's how we're going to improve this house. And this is why we're here to do something here. And so ask some questions, get engagement. If you can have some background information, do it. If you can't, just open the space. But so the more Ryan, you ask them is better.
Do you suggest to use a script or no script? Or I guess if you have more than you doing it, and you've got to have a script if you have 3 people calling on people, but if you don't have anybody, just you and you're calling on homeowners, should you have a script or not?
Here's how this is my recommendation. I have what I call a rough script. What I mean by that is it has guidelines, but you wouldn't be able to read it, meaning you wouldn't be able to just read through it and be like, that's a conversation. Now, there are companies who have that, but I always believe some added genuine who I am relating to you matters rather than just here's the script that somebody wrote for me. So questions, a couple questions and things, those are really good. Like, here are some questions we make sure we ask. Here's some points we make sure we hit. But just enough to give people a guideline is better than just saying, here's what you do every time, because then it doesn't allow flexibility for what does that client really need? What does that customer really need?
Okay, now you're having a conversation. This is where, do you say nice dog, nice cat, nice kid? I mean, how does a person, when he's walking into this home, what's the fastest way to build rapport?
I really genuinely think there's 2 ways. The asking questions, which we started to mention, being able to ask them certain things is really good because people like to be heard. So you're listening to them.
I always say the more they talk, the smarter you get, right?
Absolutely. And it helps you build rapport. And the other part, we call it acknowledgement, appreciation. You acknowledge something about it. And what you do is you might acknowledge something about their house. You might just say, wow, I just love what you did over here. Like, that's beautiful. You have such a good eye for that. They might tell you how it happened or where to, and those are the ways that you build rapport. And so, yeah, you can talk about your dog. Yeah, you can talk about a kid or something, but really, if you keep it in the realm of the house and the space, you're keeping it in your buyer's context for what they're looking for from you. So that's a great way to keep it. Keep it in the space that you're going to look at.
Okay. So you said there was 5 stages. What stage are we on now?
This would be opening moment of contact. We're really building some rapport with them, recognizing that it's hardwired for them not to trust us. So we have to actively help them trust us by asking those questions.
So when you come in and you're a contractor, my friend Ed does a thing on that. There's a couple. I think there were commercials by a bank that basically explain contractors all rip you off. They're all dishonest. They're all here to take advantage of you, and so you might as well start out because all contractors are bad and dishonest.
Well, that would be the distrust part of our brain pulling us back, and
so I think you have to sort of start. Don't you need to sort of start there? I mean, you can't assume they're going to trust you, right?
Well, what I work with my clients on is making an active process to getting them to trust you.
Okay.
So that you're doing those things like asking the questions, getting to know them, having your smile, building the actual interpersonal space where you're starting to initiate those pieces. You'll see throughout as we go that the way we ask continued questions and reinforce those answers, you're going to be building trust in the process. And so I wouldn't tell someone like, start out with, hey, you know how all contractors rip you off? Well, we're not going to. Probably not the best starting point.
Right. Or I feel like I have an issue on how contractors build rapport with architects, right? And they always make the mistake of going, I'm a great contractor. I am on time. I am on budget. It's like they hate that because they hear from every contractor they've ever talked to, right? And when you're talking to architects, you want to say, gee, how'd you become an architect? Did you start with Legos, right? Because you're trying to get on their ground, right? Even architects, same thing. How do you build trust quickly? So continue. I really like this. So what's next?
I'm going to back us up half a step for just a moment for someone to think about. I always tell people to think about how do they want their people, maybe they have a team or themselves, to enter a house. You probably you have a whole day. That's all marketing day, right? All talking to clients, and you've been in 8 houses, 10 houses, you've driven 3 hours to get to somewhere. Being conscious about, I'm priming myself. That means I'm getting my mindset for, I'm going in here and what am I being? And I always tell people every organization should be unique. What do you want your sales reps to be like? What's your culture like? What's the business you're selling to? And so you might want your people to be really prepared or really adaptable or really aggressive. I'm just saying, like, right? They go after the jobs. You might want them to be really thoughtful or really curious about questions. Doesn't matter. But have a little list of 3 to 5 that you say, this is what I want you to enter that house thinking of. That we've got great work ethic. We are excellence, teamwork. We're compassionate. I don't know, but pick your qualities so that when they enter the house, they're already thinking about that. How am I doing that? That'll help a ton as we get into the following phases. Get yourself in the mindset before you even begin a conversation.
Okay. What's the next step?
What we'll really talk about is how to get into that part where you start to have the discussion about what you're going to look at. Now, it might be fresh where you're trying to learn what they're looking for. It might be you're proposing something because you've already got that stage. Doesn't matter. But when you think about the actual conversational sharing space, what we help salespeople recognize is that the more you ask those questions that engage them and then give feedback on what you see, you're going to find that they are more engaged in that conversation. So asking questions about what are they looking for? What do they really want to see from this? What are the most important features they want? It all depends on your product, and really listening, because then when you speak back your product, that's where you win. And we always call it a lock and a key. Okay. You're looking for what is their lock? What is the thing that you need to unlock for them to really love this place? Or maybe it's fixing a problem. Maybe they got water in their basement. What do you need to unlock? And then show them the key instead of, hey guys, we have this great product and we build awesome, backyards. Like, let us do it.
Yeah. I would add to that the contractor, if you're listening to this, guys or ladies, you are a salesperson. I mean, whether you say, no, I'm just the owner of the business. If you're trying to get somebody to do what you want them to do, you're a salesperson. To me, Jesus Christ, Bouda, they're all sales guys, right? I mean, they had a message, they had behavior they wanted people to do, right? So when you walk into the house, you're the owner, your mission is to provide some service that they're going to want to purchase and feel good about it, right?
Yeah. And take it from Paul, runs a business. I run a business. Our whole role, no matter what your job is to build relationships with people and to build that repertoire. And you want them to leave where even if they don't say no, they love that experience so much that they're going to recommend you somewhere else, even if they didn't have your service done. That's the level in which this sales space we want to get to. And so asking them those questions is going to be huge. Tell me a little bit about what they're looking for. What do you see as your vision? What are the most important aspects you really want to see in our service, et cetera? Learning from them first, getting really clear about that will help you in the long run. So the best salespeople are great listeners. They're great listeners who hear people and make relations to what they're seeing and saying and want to do with their house.
Okay, Ryan. So what's the next step? Now we're in there. We're talking. Let's say it's about a remodel, right? Do you give suggestions? You talk about. I mean, how do you get them to want to use you for the remodel?
So the way we would do that is once we get those little bits of input, like they really love this idea, we acknowledge like, oh, that's really insightful. We've done some projects like that. Here's typically what we see. We really see this. So do you see this style or this style, or do you see, and you start to slowly intertwine the things that you've done or your expertise in with the questions by saying, oh, we've done this before. And we've usually approached it in 2 ways, this way or that. What do you really like? Do you like this approach or this one? Because you're helping slowly implant. We're really good at this. We know this, but we're so good that we'll even dive a step deeper than you were even thinking. Like, do you like this or this, or have you thought about these things?
So Ryan, the big question is always a tough question is when you ask for the budget, because the budget determines
absolutely.
Okay. Now the issue with most people is well, if I say it's 100,000 or I say 25, you're going to build to that number. So I'm not going to tell you my budget because I think you're going to sort of, take advantage of me to the length of my budget. So how do you get them to disclose the budget and still trust you?
So there's 4 things that people usually look for. We use it's a long-term thing. BANT is what it's called, but budget, authority, need, and timing. Need, we've been talking about. We're trying to figure out what they're really looking for. The 3 most important things for a salesperson to know after that is budget, authority, and timing. So I'm going to do the first 2 that are easier. Timing. What are they ideally looking for? Like, when do they want to start this project? When do they want it to be completed? That'll help you a bunch, with your pieces. It also helps with your budget. Authority. What we talk about there is, hey, if it's a husband and wife and you only have one of them in the room, does the other person need to have a say? And if they do, how do you help them see like, oh, well, have her give me a call, or let's set up a time with her as well.
Yeah, how did that's because it's, you know, what is it, one-legged sale? I forget the call. It's like you haven't got all the decision makers in the room. And I guess you've determined that because the wife says, well, I need to talk to my husband, I need to talk to my wife, I need to talk to my dog, whoever it is, right? So how do you, if you show up in the room and for whatever reason, I mean, probably before you showed up, you want to make sure it was going to be there. You make the appointment, you know, the husband and wife are both going to be, all the decision makers need to be in the room, right? But you show up and they're not. All right. So the wife's there and she goes, my husband had a meeting, he couldn't be here, he had whatever. Where do you go from there?
I think you're going to take your same process, walking through, getting their input and things. But when you get to this, I'm going to call it the BANT part, the budget, the authority. I think you have to look at, is it the right time to deliver a budget to them? Something that you're like, okay, it's going to range here, or here is the price, depending on what they say. Or is it correct to say the next phase we look at is how to really make sure everyone's on the same page? So I want to make sure and get your husband's input, or your wife's input, or your partner's input, or your parents' input, depending on who it is, before we put together a plan, because we want to make sure they really like the plan we're going with. They do. So would it be okay if we set up a 30-minute phone call? We set up another appointment, and after that, we'll go over budget. Would that be okay with you? And so when you ask things like, would that be okay with you? Very rarely is someone going to be like, no. By the way, if they say no, then just, okay, then they need the budget. You spent the time, sit down and do it. But most people are going to be like, yeah, that sounds okay. Like, we can do that. And so just being able to say, would it be okay if we did this? Do we set 30 minutes, et cetera? When it comes to the budget though, Paul, I think anyone who's a business person knows this is the biggest challenge, putting a budget together. And so there's multiple ways you can approach it. You can really ask for a budget. You can say, tell me a little bit about your initial budget ideas. What are you planning for this? If it's a remodel, hopefully they've planned for it, right? If it's a water in the basement issue, okay, they probably haven't planned for it. So they need to know what is the cost. And so there's two sides of asking and telling them the budget.
So Ryan, I found one good call I learned from one coach was, see if you can find out on the phone before you drive across town. The guy wants to do a $100,000 kitchen for $10,000, right? So you need to qualify the lead before you show up. I think it's critical. Right? Oh,
I agree with that part. Yes.
And
a
so
connect call
because you really can't, until you have the budget, because all designs are done to the budget, right? You can have a $300,000 kitchen, you have a $50,000 kitchen, because especially in this industry, you have to design to the budget. If you design to the dream, you're screwed, because they won't be able to afford it and it'll be a disaster, right? So you got to encourage them to give you the budget. So what would some techniques you could use? Let's play role play a little bit, okay? Ryan, okay. Yeah. So ask me for the budget and I'm going to give you typical objections. We'll see how you handle them.
By the way, you should be doing this in your discovery part of the conversation long before you get to the end. So I would typically ask them, like, as we're going through and saying, what are you looking for? What do you really want from this project? What do you want to see as a result of this project? And then I'd ask them, the hard question is, what type of budget do you want to fit within in order to see this vision come to life? What do you want to see?
Well, Ryan, I really don't feel comfortable giving you my budget. I want to have your ideas because, you know, we already have something, but I really want to tell you because I think I'd rather have what you think it's going to cost rather than me tell you what I have to spend.
If I were a salesperson at that moment, it all depends on your expertise. We have some salespeople who can't, don't know enough to be able to give some information, by the way. So if that's the case, then connecting them with the correct person to go through a level 1, a level 2, and a level 3 project, then you need to do that. But if you have the expertise, you can really sit down. You can say, here are the things you told me you're really interested in, and these are the things you're looking for. Typically, we find the budget range to be, and then be truthful and be honest, because that's the only way we're going to get business. Is we say, it looks like it's going to be about 200 to 250 is what our typical kitchen remodel is when we're looking at this level of pieces. And then we can go to, does that sound like that's within your budget? And if they tell you no, it's holy crap.
I had more of a, $75,000 in mind.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Then you can go, perfect. I appreciate you sharing that. So now if we look at a $75,000 budget, here's typically what we're looking for. And then you can start to have that back and forth dialogue about what are the most important things that they really want for features. Because if they can give you their top 3, you can go, okay, I think we can do that in 75, or well, actually for those, it always is going to end up about 125. Is that something you want to explore further? Or do we need to back it up and take some of those features out? And you're really just continuing that dual conversation with people. It's really challenging, by the way. But if you're always interested in continuing to ask them as you talk about it, you'll go a long ways. Less than tell. Don't tell. Ask and then have a response, and then ask and then have a response. You'll see a lot of benefit.
So we're asking, moving through. Okay, now, when does a close come in? How do you that whole process?
I was going to finish on the budget. A couple things. I think when you end up in, because that's like 95% of that is the number one thing. It's how much money is this going to cost? And then, no, I don't know if I can spend that. So I'd really get into, there's about a couple questions that really come to mind for me typically when I run into budget things, is helping understand the constraints in more detail. So just double clicking with them and saying, tell me a little bit about your budget. What led you to that? What got, because if it's, I Googled and I thought 100,000.
I watched a television program, and they built the kitchen in 4 days for $35,000. Why can't I do that, right?
Absolutely. If that's the case, then we educate and we help them see how we're doing things and what the value of working with a great professional contractor is. Okay. We might go into what are the benefits, features they really want to see, and then which things would they be willing to compromise on depending on budget, and helping them see that, etc. Even financing options like that. Would you be open to looking at some financing options? And I don't know what every business has, but you just ask those questions and look at that. The only other thing I'd say is, sometimes they've met with someone else or another company, or they have a different process.
The objection is, I really like what you said. I need to meet with 2 more contractors before I give you the answer.
That one is a different piece than the one I was first leaning into, and then we'll touch on that one. The first one would be, they're already considering it because it's $100,000 for something you said was $200,000. If you just double click and say, could you tell me a little bit about that program, that process, and a little bit about that? Let me see if we have comparables, and let's see if there's some flexibility in what would really work for you. You're only double clicking to see. If it doesn't work for you, it's all good, but have a great relationship. If it's something where if they go with that person, you want to tell them, I want you to really make sure you're aware of this. This is something we've run into before where we're coming back to work with people, and I just want you to have a really successful remodel. So just be aware of these things. They will have so much benefit out of you even giving your expertise for them to consider. They might come back in a month and say, well, actually,
is this a licensed contractor? Does he have insurance?
All the things,
all this stuff, all the due diligence that most homeowners have no clue about, right?
And as well as how a budget works, because how often does a contractor say it's $100,000, and then all of a sudden you hear from the client later in life, well, no, they actually end up spending $200,000.
I'm sure you've seen a picture of that boat, Ryan, where there's this huge yacht and there's little teeny boat. And the little teeny boat says original contract, and the huge boat says change order for a name, right?
Yeah. That's exactly when you can do some of that, you're giving them a ton of value. Now, if they need to think about it, by the way, they need to think about it. That happens. You're not going to sell everything the moment you close a conversation for $150,000, $200,000, even $10,000 for people. Right. And so I think your piece that I always coach around is that now we need to do what comes next clearly. And so sometimes that's setting an actual appointment up with them where you say, we'll revisit this in 2 weeks. Let's come back. Maybe I'm going back to their house. Maybe it's a conversation, quick call. It's online. You have options. But if you're clear about that, then you have a next step. And then you have some follow-up. You might have an email that goes out to them that clarifies everything. You might have them connect a week later and you say, I just wanted to check. You've been thinking about this. What type of questions have arisen? Double click with them. What did they really like about your proposal? What didn't they? Have a process to the follow-up. It will make your leads that become projects better. When we miss that, which happens in entrepreneurship, guys, I
always tell people, if you really want the contract, if you don't want the contract, you're done, right? But if you want the client, you can't leave without the next appointment. It's not an option.
Yep, exactly. And have it clear. And then if you have a little team, you have an assistant, a person in the office who does things for you, have them be your resource for some of this, saying, hey, on Tuesday, make sure I give a call to this person to check in and get that on the calendar. And what you're doing is you're making sure you're accountable, because sometimes if you're maybe the CEO, you just miss things. It happens. But we want to make sure that client feels like they're being taken care of. And so it's okay to do that. It's okay to pause the conversation and come back, but have that next appointment because you have clarity. Otherwise, you're trying to track them down. You're trying to call them. They're not responding.
Yeah,
and now
there's no easier time to make the next appointment than when you're in the room, right?
Absolutely.
Because I always do the enabler date. Like if you, the dating analogy, and if you don't leave with the phone number, you're in trouble, right? And if you have the phone, you call them, right? Then it's like, they don't answer the phone. You call them once, you call them twice. Are you being a pain in the butt?
Yep.
Are you being persistent? Where's the line between being persistent and being aggravating? And you go through all this emotional trauma trying to decide, well, I've called them twice. Do I call them again? Do I don't call them again? Right?
Yep.
I'm going to piss them off. I'm not going to piss them off. And it's very frustrating, right?
I would tell you one other thing, and it just depends where people's businesses are. But for someone whose business might be, I really would like this next job. Like this is a good, this will keep us going. I want you to really keep your mindset on the more professional is to allow them to be. When do you see yourself being able to make a decision? Because if they say it's going to take us a whole month to make a review, then maybe I set up that for 3 weeks from then, or maybe it is the whole month, rather than in my brain, I need you to say yes, because I need this. So keep the mindset that this is about the client. And when I present myself as calm and next step, and I've got a clear plan, they'll trust me more than if I'm a little bit like, I really need this job. And that happens at times, but remind ourselves to take a step back, and we're there for the client and what their needs are. It's really beneficial to do.
Okay. So now, how do you close? When do you close? You know, that's obviously, do you leave with an order? Do you leave with a signed contract? Do you leave with money? You know, how do you decide where that's going to go?
I think every business is going to be unique in this, because some of them are things that, you know, signed and payment can happen and jobs are scheduled for a week later. And some businesses are the $500,000 remodel. And that is probably not, well, some people's one-time check, right? That's probably not just here's a check because I felt like that sounded good. I think look at your methodology, your buyer context, have a few ways that you can go about that, where you can have they can sign everything right now and they're good to go. If you're really high level, maybe it's a DocuSign, which is only a few bucks a month, right? And you say, no, I want to really present ourselves as we have a very high level approach to this, and we do this system. You might have deposits and payments and down payments, and you want to look at, based on our business and our buyer, what presents the best methodology behind that. And so you may have that down payment in the moment, and you may have our office will call you on Monday, and we're going to get this set up, scheduled, and ready to go. And then you have your office, you know, a different person, give them a call, some stuff like that. So just think about, what does my buyer need and what is truly the context of our business. And that'll help you determine what the best closing process is for that line of business.
Okay.
It all depends on that.
Ryan, this thing like that. Now, I appreciate giving all this advice. Now, I mean, if you can boil it down, do they need to have a plan? I mean, here you are, you're coaching somebody on how to close a $500,000 remodel sale, and you're going to break it down into, you know, a couple, 3 or 4 sentences. Can you like deliver that for the people listening to this so they have a big takeaway?
Ooh, let's see if we can get 3 or 4 sentences. Yes. That's a really good question, because boiling it down is the way. So here's how I would typically go over 3 to 4 sentences. The moment of contact really matters to building rapport. Be mindful, be open, and be aware of your body language. Asking questions, going into discovery, and diving deeper to understand the customer or buyer, that will lead to a much better conversation. And then be confident and clear in budget, in expectations, in timing, and in follow-up. By being clear, you bring the customer clarity in this process. That's how I would sum it up. Okay,
great. So if people want to work with you, Ryan, and they're interested in either sales training or how to run a better business, how do they get in touch with you?
Well, for one, emails and phone numbers and website are the best way. I'm sure we'll have that somewhere, but you can reach our website at www.yourleapteam.com, Leap Training and Coaching. And you can reach out to me at ryan@yourleapteam.com, or at our phone number 402-415-4246. But I think the most important thing is to understand that there's so many options for this. Sometimes we just work with one person at an organization, help that executive, that CEO, that owner start to run their business more effectively. And it's really, coaching is about meeting you exactly where you are. If you're a $250 million business, great. If you're making 250,000 and you're looking at how to get to the next level, that's what we specialize in. Coaching, training, if that's a system, it all depends on what your need is, but there's a lot of value in just continuing to build your team to their next level of greatness for this. So sales are a huge part of business.
And do you have like a charge, or do the first meetings free? How do you get to know people?
The consultation, you know, setting up and getting to know us is completely free. There's actually a book now on the website. You could always reach out. And boy, not only will we get to know you, but got a few other pieces where you're telling us about your business, and we're going to give you what we can, even in that 30 minutes, 60 minutes,
Okay.
because
So
we want you to
even
be
if
successful.
even if someone calls you, Ryan, doesn't use you, the phone call in itself will have value, right? And
Yeah.
if they can make a decision to use or not to you, by guarantee, or you guarantee, Bryce, that after the phone call and that interaction, they'll know more than when they called you about their business and what to do. Is that fair?
We will end up hitting something we talked about here, something more, and about how it actually applies to something your challenges are. So absolutely, we'll spend a little time in it. We'll have some fun in the 30, 60 minutes.
Well, Ryan, thanks very much. I would call Ryan if I were you guys, because it's a phone call, right? Doesn't cost you anything. And it's definitely, you're going to be smarter at the end of the phone call than the beginning of the phone call, more educated, right?
We hope so.
I love the thing, but someone said that a smart person learns from their mistakes and a wise person learns from the mistakes of others. And so I think you want to be wise and not smart. So, thanks for coming. I really appreciate you being here. And I have to do with my son. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel, right? I says, Dad, you have to say that. Okay. So don't forget to subscribe. Really appreciate being here. Again, Ryan, thank you very much. I really appreciate that insight.
Really appreciate it. Thank you all for listening in. Thank you, Paul.